Hey BookTube friends, it's Carrie. Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for joining me. We are going on day 8 of no electricity here, and our power company says that 90% of customers should be back online by next Thursday, and everyone should be back by March 1st. But I'm okay, and I'm seeing some of the footage out of Texas, which looks pretty grim, so I'm just hoping that our BookTube friends who are out there in Texas are safe and that their family members are safe as well. So today I wanted to do a little review and discussion of The Passion According to G.H. by Clarice Lispector. And Clarice Lispector is an extremely famous Brazilian writer. So this, of course, is a translation. There have been 2 different translations, one from 1988 and one from 2012. I'm reading the 2012 version. Since it is a translation, some of the author's original intent could be lost in the nuances, and the translator does recognize this because the author was deceased before the translation, and so they didn't have the benefit of being able to interview the author about some of the word choice. So things like referencing God as the God, and in other parts of the novel referencing God as just God. And some of the word choice that I found very interesting was the use of the word neutral and neutrality throughout this book. I thought that was a very interesting word choice and very ambiguous in its use. With that being said, I don't think that it being a translation is a huge problem for this type of work. This type of work is really about the reader's interpretation anyway. And if you look at the book, the narrator is anonymous. Throughout this novel, the narrator refers to herself as I, and on a couple of occasions we learn her initials GH, which are engraved on some of her personal belongings. But that is about it. So the narrator's anonymity to me is a clear indication that this is about trying to provoke some sort of introspective discussion within the reader. The plot of this book is pretty simple. We have a well-to-do sculptress who enters her maid's room to see if it needs cleaning or organizing, and she is astonished to find that it doesn't need any cleaning or organizing. But when she opens the wardrobe, she does see a cockroach, and she kills this cockroach, which then spirals her into this sort of mystical crisis where we see the narrator in a stream of conscious inner dialogue about some major kind of existential sort of questions, questioning things like her own identity, existence, eternity, damnation, God, freedom, pain, and love. Those major questions that everyone has to ask for themselves. Initially, the maid's room is described as a desert or an insane asylum. The rest of the narrator's house is the opposite of that. It is soft beauty and very organized and neatly arranged. And so I thought this was an interesting thing because deserts are places that often do provoke mystical journeys, and insane asylums are associated with madness. So the question in this book is, where is that line? Is this narrator really on this spiritual journey that's going to lead her to a positive change, or is she spiraling into madness? And we're just seeing the beginnings of that. I also saw the description of the maid's room versus the rest of her house as essentially what is on the inside versus what the outside sees. So the outside world sees her as soft and beautiful and neatly organized, while the inside of herself is a desert. It is desolate, or is representative of her loneliness with the reference to an insane asylum. At the beginning of the book, she questions what she is, and she says that she was what others had always seen her to be, and that was the way that she knew herself. I read this book as really a struggle between the physical and spiritual nature of human beings. The author does describe a lot of physical objects, things like salt, and those descriptions and those monologues are interspersed with those major spiritual questions. There were a couple of times in the book that the narrator is having this very serious inner dialogue, and then all of a sudden we see kind of bits of her normal life or her kind of more outside frivolous life come into play. And she does reference a life of common joy, a normal life. But I read this as really a distraction, because I think most people, when they really take the time to ask themselves some of these hard religious and spiritual questions, that sort of contemplation can lead to anxiety. And I think people who are anxious or uncomfortable with these discussions, they revert back to those, quote, normal elements of their life. The narrator talks a lot about God and heaven and hell, and she says she can't even imagine heaven, because heaven to her is essentially just being. And living actually requires thinking and feeling. And you can see that the narrator is really struggling with these very anxious thoughts. One pretty major takeaway for me and how I read this book is our significance in the grand scheme of things. And the roach is an unclean being, but I also think the roach symbolized something very ancient and primordial, and it's almost as if the narrator thought the roach at some point was closer to God than maybe she was, and she was seeking some sort of connection to God, and this roach sparked some of these thoughts about her own mortality and her own place in the world and place in eternity. The last line of every chapter was the beginning line of the next chapter. And I thought that really did a lot to put you inside the narrator's head, because it really lent itself to that stream of conscious style and provided some continuity. I would say when I was reading this book that a lot of the lines in the book were kind of standalone lines. I would read a line and I would find myself wanting to just contemplate that thought for a little bit, but I didn't really have the time to, because I wanted to move on to the next line and see what else this narrator was going to think. And so there are a lot of very interesting and thought-provoking quotes in this book. I didn't flag this book or put book tabs or anything in it, because I feel like you could almost find something on every page to highlight or annotate. I do want to include one quote in particular, and that is that life is a secret mission. And that really hit home with me, because I do think that individuals, they have a free will, they have different personalities, different circumstances, different backgrounds, and it's up to each individual to find their meaning, find their purpose, find what it is that makes living worthwhile for them. Essentially, this is a book that tries to say the unsayable and describe the indescribable, and so I adore it. I know this book and this type of work in particular is not necessarily for everyone. That's okay, that's completely understandable, but I will say this is a book that I will probably revisit. I feel like there are lots of different things to contemplate and lots of different thoughts that could promote discussion, and I found it very beautifully written, and the use of particular words in this was just perplexing, mystifying, and I don't reread many books, but this is one that will definitely be revisited. So I hope everyone is having a great week, and we'll see you in my next video. Thanks, guys.